Yeah.
Okay, good morning, Moray Rabotai. We're continuing on Masechet Chagigah, and we are on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, and the limud of Amud Yomi today has been dedicated for Hatzlacha of Yeshua, Ben Dina, Diana, and his mishpacha. They should have Hatzlacha, Amen. So we are in the middle of the Sugya of Tumah V'Tahara. One of the stringencies that we learned about in Kodesh, in Kodshim, that Truma does not share is the fact that by Kodshim, there's an extra level of Tahara that you have to go through a process with which the Gemara says, Be'ida dechatcha adayin lachahi bishlama, the Rabbi Yehoshua haynu de'ika hekera leseduki, ditnan metamein hayu et hakohen hasoref et hapara leotzi miliban shel sedukin, שהיו אומרים במעורבי שמש הייתה נעשית, אלא רבי אליעזר אמרת בשלמה בעלמא בעינן הערב שמש, היינו דאיקה הכרה לסדוקין, אלא היא אמרת בעלמא לא בעינן הערב שמש, מה הכרה לסדוקין איקה? The Gemara says basically that our Mishnah over here that says kelim hanigmarim betahara, they need still a level of tahara for Kodesh. It's not Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah said if you have a kli that you are finishing it up right now, you are tahor, the kli is tahor, you finish the kli mamash betahara. Still for Kodesh is tameh. You have to go dip it in the mikveh. You say, why do you need mikveh for that? The Gemara says because we are choshesh, maybe an amaharis was there before he was finished, and a little bit of a spit, a little bit of a saliva jumped on the keli. It's a chumrah. We're assuming maybe something jumped on the keli and now still is wet after you finish the keli. That's why you have to dip it in the mikveh. Again, it's a chumrah. It's not something that happened. It's something that we say maybe it will happen. Hence the chumrah of Kodesh over teruma. But the Gemara then says this can't be Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah, our Mishnah can't be Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Because we know Rabbi Eliezer said a different halacha when it comes to me hatat. When you deal with efer para aduma, if a person wants to contain the efer para aduma in a vessel, and you're making this vessel for it. Imagine if you have a reed, you're cutting it up, you're making a container for me hatat or for efer para aduma. So we learned in the Braita that when you cut this, when you make this, Rabbi Yehoshua says you have to touch it to a tum'ah. You have to bring something tameh. Touch this vessel that you just finished making, tahor. You touch the tum'ah on it, and then you go dip this in the mikveh, and then you're ready. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you don't need to. You just could dip it in the mikveh and use it. You don't need to touch tum'ah. So what's the backdrop of this? So we learned that the Sdukim used to say anything of para aduma cannot be tevul yom. It has to be completely tahor. That means if I am a bal keri and I go to mikveh, it can't be. I have to wait until it's tevul yom. You have to wait until meurave shemesh. It has to be until night. You're completely tahor. Then you go and deal with para aduma, with efer para aduma. Chachamim said no. There are twice that it says in the pasuk tahor, v'zah tahor ala tameh. It's the second one, and that means it's an extra level of tahara that the pasuk is allowing for efer para aduma. So not only a person that's completely tahor could be dealing with efer para aduma, but even a tvul yom, even a person that has gone to mikveh but hasn't waited until night, that person also could be dealing with efer para aduma. This is the machloket chachamim and tzdukim, where tzdukim are more machmir than chachamim. And we mentioned before that tzdukim will look down at chachamim in some sense, and chachamim went out of the way to disprove that notion of tzdukim in the public eye. So here, what they did was something very strange. They said anything of paraduma, we make sure it's done by a tevul yom. That means we'll have a person that's tahor. We would literally touch them with tum'ah and say, okay, now go to do tevilah. You come out from dipping in the mikveh. What are you now? A tevul yom. So, okay, now do paraduma. Every person that dealt with paraduma had to be a tevul yom, which is strange because why isn't it better to have someone that's completely pure? Well, it's halachically not a difference really, but because it looks a little bit iffy that you are making someone tameh, it's as if you don't have enough respect for paraduma. They made all kinds of chumrot when it comes to mehatat to compensate this kula that they did. But the kula is there. That anything that you want to deal with mechatat, you have to do something to it to show that this is tevul yom. So I understand Rabbi Yehoshua's position. You're making a container for mechatat, and you touch tum'ah to it, and then you dip it. You yotze this. You check your box of being metamem, the vessel of mechatat or efer paraduma. That's Rabbi Yehoshua. What does Rabbi Eliezer do with this chumrah, or this kula rather, that we have to do? How does Rabbi Eliezer deal with it? So the Gemara wants to infer from this that you see Rabbi Eliezer normally would require a hair of shemesh for this tum'ah, for this concept of kelim anigmarim betara. They need tevilah for kodesh, right? In other words, our Mishnah said, kelim that you finished, vessels that you crafted and finished with tahara, with mindfulness of it being tahor. And who's making it? A person that's tahor, right? A chaver, a tamei chacham. Our Mishnah said, if it's going to be used for kodesh, it needs tevilah. It's a chumrah. Well, we said from our Mishnah, you see, you only need tevilah, but you don't need what? Harev shemesh. You don't need until night. You just dip it in the mikveh and you're good to go. Right? Remember that? Now the Mishnah says, the Gemara says rather, you see from this piece that Rabbi Eliezer holds that not only you have to dip it, but you also have to wait until nightfall. How do you see that? Because if, normally speaking, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't require for the vessel to also have harev shemesh, to also wait until nightfall. So what is the kula that he is implying for me parach aduma? Bishlama, if you say that normally speaking, you have to dip it, and also you have to wait until night, you could say, fine. Now it makes sense that Rabbi Eliezer says when it comes to paraduma, we knock it off one level. We say just dip it, and it's as if it's tevul yom, because normally you have to wait until nightfall. Now you don't have to wait for nightfall. You do one level less to go against the sedukim. That would make sense. In other words, what am I doing to disprove the notion of sedukim? If I'm Rabbi Eliezer, so well, if I hold that this item, when I dip it normally, without it being used for paraduma, normally I would dip it and I would have to wait until nightfall. But now that it is used for efer paraduma, I dip it and I don't have to wait. That already is disproving the case of the tzdukim.
Proving yourself. Like if you're saying that it was never really necessary in the first place.
Yeah, the whole thing is a chumrah, correct. You're saying good. The whole thing is for chumrah of kodesh. The question is, how much chumrah do you apply for kodesh? Remember, this was nigmarim betara. No tum'ah touched this. I just finished crafting this. You want to be machmir that not only we are choshesh that some saliva of something fell on it, but I'm going to be more machmir that not only you have to dip it, you have to also wait until nightfall. That's like chumrah on top of a chumrah. So I could knock down one level of my chumrah if I'm Rabbi Eliezer and say, well, what I do to show against the Sadukim is, if you want to use this keli and Gmarim B'Tahara for paraduma, don't wait until nightfall, which I would regularly require. Just dip it and use it, right? But that only makes sense if normally I, Rabbi Eliezer, would require Haref Shemesh, would require waiting until the nightfall. So from here, the Gemara says, you see what? You see Rabbi Eliezer holds that for Kodesh, when you dip Kelim HaNigmarim B'Tahara, a vessel that was finished, its crafting was finished B'Taharat, with completely being Tahor, not only it needs to be dipped in the mikveh, but you also need Haref Shemesh. And hence, our Mishnah who says Kelim HaNigmarim B'Tahara only needs dipping in the mikveh, but not Haref Shemesh, can't be who? Rabbi Eliezer. That was the whole Mishnah. Now the Gemara, that was the whole Gemara. Now the Gemara says, no, that's not at all muchach. That's not necessarily true, because what does our Mishnah talk about? Kelim HaNigmarim B'Tahara, they need tevilah for Kodesh, right? But what is the other Mishnah / Braita talk about? Talking about Efer Paraduma. Remember, the levels, there are 5 levels. There's Chulin, there's Maser Sheni, there's Teruma, there's Kodesh, and then, of course, there is the 5th highest level of Paraduma, of Mechatat. So the Gemara essentially is going to answer that it could be, our Mishnah could be Rabbi Eliezer. Our Mishnah says you don't need Haref Shemesh. Over there it says you do need Haref Shemesh. The Gemara is essentially going to answer yes, because there you're talking about Me Parachaduma, and there is an additional level of Chumrah that they created for Efer Paraduma. And that is also part and parcel of the crazy Chumras that they made to compensate the leniency that they had against the Sadukim. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. That by Me Paraduma, by Efer Paraduma, you need, normally speaking, not to just dip, but you also need to wait until Haref Shemesh, until the nightfall. That's what the Gemara is going to say.
What is the Sadukim hold for Mechatat? Did they also put an extra?
No, they just learned the Chumash differently. They said it says Ish Tahor, it means he has to be completely Tahor.
Kodesh and Mechatat were the same level of Yisrael?
Not necessarily in that way, but they didn't have this Chumrah of Mechatat, they didn't have. So says the Gemara, let's read through it. Basically, what we said, what the Gemara is going to say, we're just going to go through the steps now. If you say that normally by Kodesh you don't need Haref Shemesh, according to Rabbi Eliezer, my heker al sedukin. What would be the heker? What would be the point that he would make against the sedukim? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Asauha ketame sheretz. Says no. Chazal made this ketame sheretz. In other words, our Mishnah could be Rabbi Eliezer. You ask why in our Mishnah it says just dip it, and in Efer Paraduma it says you have to dip it, and it seems like Rabbi Eliezer would hold that normally you also have to wait until nightfall, because by Efer Paraduma, one of the acrobatic chumras that they made was, they said, you see this Efer Paraduma? You have to imagine when you make the keli for containing it, anything that deals with it, you give it a tum'ah, not just a regular tum'ah, but a tum'ah of tameh sheretz. Now, sheretz makes everything rishon the tum'ah, right? It's a higher level of tum'ah. It's a level of tum'ah that needs haref shemesh. It's a level of tum'ah that going to mikveh is not sufficient. You have to also wait until nightfall. So says the Gemara, one of the chumras that they gave Efer Paraduma is if you want to deal with Efer Paraduma, for instance, you're making a keli for it, we give the status of Tum'at Sheres to that keli. And now you have to deal with it. So therefore, just dipping the keli in the mikveh is not sufficient because for Tum'at Sheres, you need Harav Shemesh. You have to dip the keli in the mikveh and now you have to put it aside until nightfall. Okay? Mara says that can't be. It can't be Tum'at Sheres because Tum'at Sheres, if this keli would be Tameh Tum'at Sheres, if I touch it, a human being that touches this, what do I become? I become nothing. A vessel that became Tameh Tum'at Sheres cannot make me Tameh. Right? Cannot make me Tameh. Because this is not Ava Tum'ah. So it can't make me Tameh. For this to make me Tameh, it has to be touching a corpse. Then this becomes, because corpse is Avi Avota Tum'ah. Right? Avi Avota Tum'ah makes this Ava Tum'ah and makes me Tameh. Right? And we know that by this Kelim Anigmarim Betahara, the person that deals with it also becomes Tameh. So it can't be Tum'at Sheres. It's got to be something higher than Tum'at Sheres. You with me? Says the Gemara, Elamata lo tetameh Adam. It shouldn't make an Adam Tameh. Alama Tanya, why is it that we learned in the Braita? Chotcha umatbila, the person that cuts this vessel and makes this vessel, and not only that, but the person that takes it to mikveh afterwards, is mamash like Efer Paraduma, that if you carry it and if you sprinkle it, you become Tameh. Here, the vessel that's going to be the container of Kodesh, of Mechatat rather, of Efer Paraduma, the guy that takes it to mikveh, he himself becomes Tameh. So says the Gemara, can't be that's Tum'at Sheres. Because Tum'at Sheres, if I touch it, it doesn't make me Tameh. But here, Chotcha u'matbilat ha'on tevila. So says the Gemara, tries another thing. Says no, they didn't give it Tum'at Sheres, they gave it Tum'at Met. What the chumrah it is. Can you imagine? If you have this vessel that you're making for Me Parach Aduma, for Erev Parach Aduma, Chazal said when you make this vessel, you ought to deal with this vessel as a Tameh Tum'at Met. Now, Tameh Tum'at Met is Ava Tum'ah. It could make me Tameh because a corpse is Avi Avota Tum'ah, the grandfather of Tum'ah. So he touches something, it becomes Ava Tum'ah, touches me, makes me Tameh. So that makes sense now. That also can't be. You know why that can't be? Because if something is Tameh Met, Tum'at Met, what is the halacha for it? You have to wait 7 days, and not only that, you have to go the third day and the seventh day, you have to sprinkle Me Parach Aduma on it. It's not so simple to go through a process of Tahara for Tumat Met. And over here, we're not saying that you have to wait 7 days. We're just saying you dip it and you wait until nightfall. That's all. So says the Gemara, if it is true that they gave it the status of Tumat Met, it has to be requiring a third and seventh with the sprinkling and waiting. But here we don't have that. You just dip it and you wait until the nightfall. So the Gemara says, Alama Tanya, why is it that we learned in the Braita, Chotcha u'matbila, the guy that cuts it and the person that dips it in the mikveh, ta'un tevila, you only need tevila in haza'ah shlishi v'shvili. You only need tevila, but you don't need the sprinkling and the waiting of third and seventh day. Ela asauha, the Gemara says the final attempt. The final attempt is, you know what they gave it? They gave it the status of Tameh Tumat Met, but not in the beginning, the very end. This is as if it's like a fabricated status. right? It's fabric. We imagine in your mind that this became tameh 7 days ago, tumat met. So it's a higher level of tum'ah, but it's at the end of its waiting period. So it's a higher level of tum'ah that even though that this is a vessel, I touch it, I become tameh, just like if this would have been tumat met, right? But it's not like the fresh tameh tumat met that now you have to wait 7 days and a sprinkle. It's like the last day. So you dip it. What would have happened by tameh tumat met after all the sprinklings and waiting 7 days? You would dip it and you wait until night and you're good to go. So it's a higher level. It's not just like tumat zav that if I touch it, I don't become tameh. It's like tumat met that if I touch it, I become tameh. But it's at the same time not requiring a full 7 days. It's like as if it's the last day of it. So it's a higher level of tum'ah, but at the end of the wait period. So it's like this fabricated status that they gave it. It's almost the highest level of tum'ah, but without the waiting 7 days. Again, he has to just go to Tevilah. So says the Gemara. This is the final attempt. This is it, right? Now the Gemara is just going to bang out one little detail. Gemara says, didn't we learn in a Braita that Chazal never fabricated a new status of something that doesn't exist in para? I mean, anything that they said is things that exist, not some fabricated level. So what you're saying is, like, this poor guy just made a vessel in his house. The guy's a Tameh Hacham, and nothing Tameh came around it. You say, this keli that was Nigmar B'Tara, if you want to use it for Para Aduma, it's like a Tumat Met at the end of its stage of wait of 7 days. I mean, that sounds to me like fabrication. And we learned in the Braita, we never fabricated a Tum'ah when it comes to Para Aduma. We just supercharge the levels of Tum'ah, but no fabrication. The Gemara says that's exactly correct. Amar Abaye. Abaye answered, Shelo Amru Kardom Metame Moshav. When we say they never fabricated something, it means they never created a Tum'ah that would never exist. But they did supercharge the level of Tum'ah to something that could have been. Let me explain this, okay? That means this keli, if it actually would touch Tum'at Met, what would this become? It would become Tameh Met. And then you had to wait 3 and 7 days, and then you would have to dip it and wait until Harav Shemesh, and then it will be good. So it's not fabrication. It's imagination of a real level of Tum'ah. That means if this would really touch a Tum'at Met, it would become like this. It's just that it didn't touch Tum'at Met. We assume that it did. But then there are you know what fabrication means? Fabrication would mean like this. If you have a hammer, right? For a hammer to become Tum'at Tameh Tum'at Moshav, there's something called Tum'at Mishkav Umoshav. If you have a zav that sits on something, that thing becomes tameh. Even if it doesn't touch the tum'ah. It could be an under layer. It becomes tameh tum'at moshav or mishkav, right? If you have a tum'at mishkav, someone sleeps, goes to sleep on a mattress, and the mattress is on top of another mattress, on top of another mattress, another mattress. You didn't touch or move any of the bottom ones. Tumat mishkav. But there is a halacha in tumat mishkav u'moshav that if that thing is not made for being a seat, you never sit on a hammer, hopefully, that does not get tumat moshav, period. Doesn't get, so that's fabrication. To say that I will give a status of Tumat Moshav to a hammer, that's fabricating a new Tum'ah that doesn't exist. In other words, if you would go bring an actual Zav and sit on it, it would not become Tameh. Well, not touching it, right? It will not become tameh because it is excluded from the pasuk, as we're going to see in just a moment, and therefore it would be completely fine. Versus what you're saying right now is not a fabrication. If a tumat met would touch this, it would actually become tameh met. It would. It's not excluded. It's just that it didn't, in reality, touch tumat met. We are giving it that status, but the status is not a fabrication. That's what Abaye says. This means that they leolam lo chideshu davar bepara means they never fabricated a non-existing level of tum'ah, but not that they gave it status of something that would have actually been if it happened. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye shelo amru kardo metameh moshav kedetanya. Now let's study the Braita that actually talks about this halacha. We learned in the Braita. V'hayoshev ala keli, the pasuk says that the person that sits on a keli, it becomes tameh. I read you the full pasuk. V'hayoshev ala keli asher yeshev alav hazav. A person that sits on a keli that the zav sat on, yechabes begadav v'rachas b'mayim v'tameh ad ha'erev. You have to also go dip in the mikveh and wait out of shemesh. That means a kli that the zav sits on becomes tameh to the degree that could make you tameh if you sit on that kli. Okay? So the Gemara now darshins this pasuk. V'ayoshev ala kli yachol kafa se'ah v'yashav aleha tarkav v'yashav aleha yeh tameh. Can it be that you flip a kli that usually nobody sits on, you flip it on its face and you sit on the back of the kli? It's not a chair, it's not a seat. You're just using a vessel to sit on, which normally is not used as a seat. Can it be now tameh? Say, well, a zav sat on it. So if a zav sat on it, now it becomes tameh tum'at mishkav, tum'at moshav rather, and therefore it will be metameh adam. If you sit on a kli that they sit on, and the Gemara darshins from this, Misha meyuchad liyeshiva, only a kli that's meyuchad, it's designated, is normal for it to be sat on. It is normal to be used as a seat. It excludes this kli that people come and say, get up, we need the vessel. It's not a seat. What are you sitting on this? Right? So anything that's not miyuchad liyeshiva, anything that is a vessel for something else, and you decided to turn it into a seat, is not actually, so a kardom, a hammer, is not something that people sit on. So anything that is not miyuchad liyeshiva is excluded from the parasha of Tum'at Moshav, and therefore is not tameh. So therefore the Gemara says, over here you have a Tum'ah that by para aduma, we don't fabricate a Tum'ah, means we don't fabricate a level of Tum'ah that would not have been effective to say, well, this kardom, this hammer becomes tameh Tum'at Moshav. That they didn't say by para aduma, because that's fabrication of a Tum'ah that doesn't exist. The Torah has excluded that level of tumah. But if you say this, we deal with this as tameh tumat met, that's fine, because this could have become tameh tumat met. You're following? So now let's just sum up what we said. Okay, our Mishnah said we'll go through the entire last Amud, from the middle of the previous Amud to where we just finished. It's summed up to in 2 minutes. The Mishnah said, a keli that's kodesh, it has a chumrah over a keli that's used for teruma. One of the chumrot that it has is, if I am a craftsman and I just made this keli, mamash just made it, and it's tahor, I'm tahor, everything else is tahor, you still have to dip it if you want to use it for kodesh, even though that's tahor. It's a level of chumrah that we gave kodesh because of a very far-fetched chashash concerned that maybe right before I finished it, some customer came to my store that was Zav, was Tameh, and his saliva jumped on this almost finished keli, and then in the next 5 minutes I finished it, and the saliva still is wet, and therefore he made it Tameh. Because of this very far-fetched chashash, they said for Kodesh, we go even far-fetched, and therefore you need to dip it in the mikveh. That's the din, the halacha of our Mishnah. And that's the reason behind it. That's it. Now, the Gemara went to say, who is the Mishnah's author? The Gemara wanted to suggest that it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. Because our Mishnah is pretty clear that you dip it in the mikveh and you're good to go. You don't have to wait until night. We wanted to suggest that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold like that. Rabbi Eliezer holds that for Kodesh, if you dip, you have to also wait until nightfall. Where do you see that? You see it by a vessel that you made to contain the efer of para aduma. Because there you see Rabbi Eliezer wanting to be mekel against the Sedukim. There he allowed to do dipping without harif shemesh, without waiting. So that indicates that for regular Kodesh, he would be machmir. The Gemara said, no, that's only, for Kodesh, is not going to be machmir. The Gemara said, for Kodesh, he also would be mekel. So therefore, our Mishnah could also be Rabbi Eliezer. That in Kodesh, he says, only dip it and you're good. By me para aduma, he will say, you need harif shemesh. Because again, there's Kodesh, the fourth level of Chumrah in our Mishnah, and then there is fifth level, one higher would be Mechatat. So it could be Rabbi Eliezer. Then the rest of the daf until here was just technicality. You said, really? You saying that for Efer Para Aduma, you need to dip it and you need to wait Harif Shemesh, and that's Rabbi Eliezer, right? Well, how does that work exactly? If it's a level, the Gemara said it gave it a level of Tumat Sheres, right? Tumat Sheres. That just like Sheres needs Harif Shemesh, you need to wait until the nightfall. Here also, the Gemara said it can't be too much Sheres, because Sheres, if I touch something that's Tameh too much Sheres, I don't become Tameh. Here, the person that makes the Kli becomes Tameh. The person that takes the Kli to mikveh becomes Tameh. He himself has to go to mikveh afterwards, right? So the Gemara said, no, it's Tumat Met. It's like Tumat Met that you have to also go to mikveh if you touch it. And the Gemara said, wait a second, it can't be Tumat Met because then you have to wait for the Kli itself. You have to wait Shelishi v'Shavi'i. Over here, you don't have to. The Gemara said, no, it's Tumat Met in its last stage of the last day. The Gemara said, isn't that a fabrication? That this could become Tameh Tumat Met? Said, no, it's not a fabrication. Fabrication would have been to say that a kardome hammer could become Tameh Tumat Moshav. So basically, what we are saying is the our Mishnah could be Rabbi Eliezer. We explained how Rabbi Eliezer deals with me para aduma and efer para aduma, and we are now up to the next level of our Mishnah, which B'ezrat Hashem we will continue in the days to come.
Rabbi, what's